Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And before we begin, I just want to remind you that if you are a self-published author looking for help with your covers, your blurbs, your editing or advertising, we have a whole suite of services that we offer, which could help you. So be sure to check the link down below and see if anything suits your fancy. But let's just jump into it today because we have a very, very special guest. Well, delighted to welcome to the show. It is Jan McInnis, who is, you have quite the resume. You are a stand-up comedian, a keynote speaker, an author, a comedy writer. I'd actually heard of you before we had this because I used to work in hospital networks, and I heard you did a very, very good presentation for the folks at the Mayo Clinic. So,
oh yeah, fun. That was fun.
I am delighted to speak to you, Jan. How are you doing today?
Excellent from rainy Los Angeles. It's was 80 yesterday, and it's 65 today, I think.
Oh wow, I always thought it was beautiful sunny weather in Hollywood, but
I know it. We pay too high prices to have weather like this.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jan. Of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Roland, and welcome, Jan. So you've been writing and you've been working in comedy for, I think you said 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And you've even written a couple books on adding, on humor, but the different aspects of how to use it in your life. What we want to talk today about is adding humor to writing, which is often something that punches up the writing regardless of what genre you're writing in. So why don't you start us off by telling us a bit about yourself and your career and what led you to this point here?
Sure. A lot of mistakes and sort of just things. Luck gets me to my career here. I look back on it. There's not like a direct line. There's a lot of starts and stops and this twists and turns. But I had started with a marketing career and never thought of myself as a comedian or a comedy writer or anything. Didn't even think I was a really good writer. But I jumped into comedy. I always wanted to do it. And I remember after graduating from college, we had that nice dinner at a nice restaurant with my family. And I'm thinking, now is not the time to tell them I want to be a comedian. So kind of went into the marketing career for about a dozen or more years. Finally, always had the comedy bug, kind of kept getting on stage here and there. And finally, I got hired off of one of my first open mics to work. And that kind of changed everything. And I started working the hard bar gigs and the, comedy clubs and stuff. And along the way, I was always a good writer. For some reason, I was just able to write humor. And my humor was my marketing was better than my act because I was a marketing person prior to comedy. And my writing was actually carried me through when I didn't really have any stage presence because the jokes were there. It was joke. I'm not, a lot of people do stories and that's great. I'm more of a, 3 or 4 jokes a minute kind of person. When I added into writing, I, like to add setup punch type of things. But I found that I was good at writing and got my stage presence back together, kind of went on the road for comedy. And then about 10 or so years into my comedy career, what was it, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, people started saying, hey, I got into corporate comedy, and then people were saying, hey, we want a comedian at our convention. We really need a message. So I came up with keynotes. I didn't even know what keynote was. And now I do humor keynotes, no more late nights and drunks at 1 a.m. And if they are, I'm at least getting paid better for it. And I went into doing humor keynotes. But also in my keynotes, I talk about using humor in business and in your personal life and how to do it, because people think it's something that, oh, I'm not a comedian, or I don't have a comedy background, I can't do it. And there really are some simple ways and things you can do to add humor to your writing. And it's got so many great benefits that, people just don't think of it and they don't use it. And so I'm kind of on a mission here. When I talk in my keynotes, I tell business leaders how to use it. I, of course, throw in rules so you don't get yourself in trouble. But yeah, that's kind of my journey for the moment up to in a nutshell.
Well, that's great. I mean, I'd love to hear some of the ways that people can add humor in, because I'm sure there's a lot of authors that they're not opposed to having humor, but they just
Yeah. Well,
think that they're funny or whatever.
Right. And when you talk about humor in business or humor in your writing, you're not looking to be like comedian, boom, 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 I'm always on. You're just trying to add a little bit of levity, pull out the humor in the situation. A couple quick benefits before we get into doing it, though, because people really are hesitant, but it's a great way to connect with your audience, whether you're in person or they're reading. Don't you get that kind of aha moment when you make that connection that gets your humor? It's a nice way to connect. It's a nice way to make people want to listen to you and also remember your message. Super Bowl commercials here and what is it, $10 million for 15 seconds or something? It's crazy. But a lot of them are humorous because they know humor connects. People want to laugh. And there's so much you're competing with these days. I mean, everyone's trying to do something different or creative. There's so much you're competing with. If you don't try to be a little different yourself, if you just keep sending the same message out, kind of gets lost in the shuffle. So people kind of expect to be a little entertained. And you can find some humor in the situation and add that in.
Is there a danger that, you said that, your humor can connect with your audience and help your message be memorable because people, identify with the humor or find it funny, but what if they don't find it funny? What if not everyone has the same
scared
well, not everyone has the same sense of humor, right? So what you might think is funny, some people might read that and be like, that's
well, what I say when you're using humor, first of all, do the stuff that you truly think is funny. I mean, don't do something that you think people are going to think is funny. If you think it's funny, you'll sell it, you'll enjoy it. Don't focus on, oh my gosh, it might bomb, because whatever you focus on is what's going to happen, right? Go in and have some fun with it and do what you truly think is funny. Pull out the humor in the situation. You'll sell it. If it's not killer comedian funny, it's okay. In business and writing, people don't expect you to be a comedian. They usually just appreciate that you're trying to use a little bit of humor. They don't get mad. They get mad if you're in a comedy club and you're not funny. Trust me. When you start out, we all have those nights. But in other writing and stuff, especially if you're writing a novel or something, and if you add a little bit of humor, it's kind of fun and unexpected, and people, and even just a little bit where people kind of laugh and have an aha moment. That's kind of what you're looking for when you're writing. You don't have to be killer funny unless you're writing comedy.
Right. I mean, writing when you write a book, it's so interesting because you want to engage people and make them stay engaged through it. And there are various things you can do. You can have a book that's really exciting and gets their heart racing, or you can have a book that's got saucy scenes and stuff. I find humor is really effective. I remember reading Hugh Laurie, who from that show House. He wrote one book called The Gun Seller, and it's so sad he only wrote one book. It was hilarious, and I remember reading the entire thing. It was a fantastic thriller, but it was so funny that it just stayed with me. It's been one of my favorite books ever since. And it's like, I think humor is such a powerful thing if you get it right.
It sticks with you. You remember. You may not remember you remember the author, famous, but if you don't remember the author, but you'll remember the humor of the book, or there's that book on trees but it had some humor in it, and it's a great way to stay memorable and make people want to read your second one. Every author would love to have someone go, wow, I wish they'd write another book, instead of, wow, they wrote another book.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Stephen King's always knocking them out, and they're not necessarily like laugh fests. Whereas if you have a book that is guaranteed going to make you laugh at least once, then you kind of look forward to reading it.
Yeah, and just the humor, or just some of the tips, ways you can add humor is just pulling out the irony in the situation, pull out the disconnects, the things that don't make sense. They're all around us, and we don't pay attention. And I did an event one time, and the speaker ahead of me was speaking on networking. The title of his talk was "Never Eat Lunch Alone." On the agenda right after him, lunch on your own. I mean, we're not paying attention to it. And if you just start, practice, and I do say humor is a muscle you want to practice. So start looking around for it, and start looking at whatever you're writing. How does it, jump out? What are some of the things that aren't making sense? So looking for the ironies and pulling those kind of things out are certainly a great way to find humor fast. I would also say, comedians, we ask questions. You got to ask questions about things, and we come up with outrageous answers. Look at something and ask a question. My first joke I told for Jay Leno to the Tonight Show was, it was right before the Super Bowl years ago, and there was a newspaper report about vendors, something that I'm going to be paraphrasing, but something the vendors are going to be selling T-shirts and a paraphernalia, whatever, for the Super Bowl that is not official. And so the joke was, you start asking questions about that. Okay, how do you tell if something's not official? How do you know? Does it give you a rash? Does it, is it the price? There I came up with a joke. Super Bowl vendors are going to be selling stuff that's not official. If it's not official, if you can afford it. So
See, there we go. You made me laugh already.
Yeah. So just take something and ask some questions. There's my cat Flo. She likes to add a little humor. Ask questions about it and have some fun with that. And comedians are always asking questions, and we're asking outrageous questions, coming up with outrageous answers. Do take things to extremes. If you listen to any comedian talk, we don't say someone is 100 years old. We say they're 10,000 years old. Or they don't weigh 100 pounds. They weigh 10,000 pounds. We look at kind of everything like it's a problem, and we ask the question, how would I solve this if I could solve this any way I want? And we come up with extreme solutions to stuff. And that's where the humor is, taking things to extremes.
Right. Yeah. And I think with the irony example that you gave, sometimes authors can even use that in situations where, you've created a situation in your book that maybe doesn't make as much sense, and maybe you don't really know how to explain it, and you can't think something better, so you call it out. you have somebody mention it, and then it's kind of makes it okay for some reason.
Yeah. And the more you do it, the more this stuff just pops off the page. For comedians, we've been doing it so long, we just walk in a room and we start looking around for the things that aren't making sense, and the high ceilings. And I did an event for a hospital, and they had their centerpiece was dried flowers, and I'm like, well, how good is this hospital? They can't even keep the plants alive. But they don't think of that, because they think, oh, dried flowers are gonna be great for our hospital event. But we think of that because we've been doing it so much.
Yeah, I think one of the dangers maybe for people that aren't haven't flexed that muscle so much, and they're trying to add some humor, there might be the danger of being a little too cliche, making the jokes a little too obvious.
Yeah.
Any advice around that?
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the sort of rules. There's no rules in comedy clubs for humor. If you're funny, your funny is funny, and if the club owner likes your stuff, it doesn't matter who it offends or whatever. But when you're writing for the general public, or writing a speech or a book or something, you want to pay attention to some rules. First of all, I would say don't do the obvious stuff. People have heard it. They've heard the jokes. I did a show for 500 blind merchants. I was the only sighted person in the room. So comedian, you want to get on stage, you go, hey, I'm naked. Don't say that, because they put in, it's just that visual, but also they put in my contract, you cannot do any blind jokes. We have heard everything you can. And they had a great sense of humor, and I had a great show, but they've heard it. Have they heard it? Or I did a show for postmasters, and my friends were all like, oh yeah, going postal. No, they've heard it. Try not to do the easy, cheap laugh. I did an event one time for people, and they ran out 4,400 people, and they ran out of dinner for 1,500. And it was plated, and it was their employee appreciation banquet. So I could have gone out on stage and pulled the curtain back and said, hey, I found them. No, that's a cheap shot. That's mean. You have someone backstage, the meeting planner, who's terribly upset about it. And you don't be mean, use your common sense, stay away from, hot topics, sex, drugs, rock and roll, politics, unless that's the type of book you're writing, or that's the type of thing you're doing. Know your audience, certainly know who you're trying to reach. But usually, I'd say especially when you're starting out, kind of be cautious and be a little more constricted with your using humor. And again, the same old stuff we've heard. Now you can use, what do you call I want to say standard, he's so big, she's so loud, he's, what do you call those, kind of stock stuff.
Stereotypes.
Like formula type things. You can, a top list. You don't have to be top 10 or things like that to get you started and add a little bit of humor. but don't do obvious stuff, But if you like, again, my big rule for when people are trying to use humor is, again, be true to yourself. Do what you really think is funny, what makes you laugh, and you'll sell it. You'll feel good about it. You'll write it up the way you want to write it up, and people will go along for the ride with you.
And one of the things that's unique about your career is, I mean, you're known somewhat as like as a clean comedian, but that means you can go in front of big corporate crowds and things like that. And I think as an author, to be a successful author, you have to identify the particular genre that you're going to write in, the niche that you're going to write in, the audience who you're writing to. And it seems like there's a direct correlation with comedy that way as well.
Yes. And I do tell starting out comics, be true to you, really be true. If you write dirty joke, if you all use the F word all the time, or if that's you got to be you. You aren't going to work the same places I work. You're not, you're going to have different opportunities, and maybe someone better. There's a lot of famous people who curse on stage and do what they want, and they've always done it. But you got to do how you speak and how you think, and you'll find your audience. Writing a book, know what you're going for, and if your audience is if they're okay with dirty jokes or whatever, and you feel okay with it. I never felt okay with it. It really wasn't my thing to go up and be graphic and all that. And I just always felt like I want my family and friends to be comfortable when they come to see me. Right. It's a little awkward. I worked with a guy years ago, and his mother was in the room, and the stuff he was saying on stage was just like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding. And I worked with another guy, and who was also as filthy. And he, at the end of the week, the last show, he came up to me and he said, I don't understand it. I have thrown everything I've got at this audience. He was really dirty and he was going downhill fast. And he said, you're still able to follow me with that clean humor. And I said, you got to be you, be yourself. Stop trying to get me. His whole time he was featuring, I was headlining. He wanted to get me and to make me have a bad show so he could be the headliner. And he told me that. And I said, just be yourself, and they'll see your uniqueness and your brand of humor, and it'll resonate with people. And, the club owner will see it for that. So the same with your audience when you're writing. Be yourself, be whatever your character in the book is. If that's what the kind of humor they would use, do that. If that's the kind of book you're writing, do that. Do what fits, There's not, I like any kind of humor as long as it's funny. I mean, if it's dirty, whatever it is, as long as it's funny, it's got a punchline, and it's not just being cursing for cursing's sake. I think we're all over that. That was shock humor 20 years ago. Now it's not so shocking. Somebody cuts you off in traffic or whatever, and they hurl worse words than what we used to say on stage. But
well, listen, clean works for Seinfeld, right? So he had a career with clean comedy.
I knew I'd have more things open to me as clean too, and that's just the way I write and the way I think. So
yeah, I mean, if you're writing clean, you can your audience is anybody, right? Whereas if you're writing more dirty, then you do have a specific, not just the audience that you think will like it, but you're not going to be playing that for kids, and you're not going to be playing that at a church group. Like you want to make sure. But with clean, you could do it anywhere. Sure, maybe some people won't find it funny, but it can go to any audience. So,
and I don't think clean jokes are necessarily not as funny as dirty jokes.
Oh,
I would almost say the opposite. I would say, like,
it's,
well, like I said, look at Seinfeld. I mean, he's the most successful comedian around, and he's always been very, very clean.
Harder to write clean because you really have to find a punchline. Really have to find a punchline. And I'll tell you, I've been introduced. I've had two incidences, one in a theater, one in clubs, where the theater show they introduced me because I've been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Huffington Post for my clean humor. And when they announced that, I was booed. And I went on. It was a retirement community, and a big one. And I've been back 3 times since then because they loved it. What I did 10 minutes in, I stopped and said, "You guys good with this now?" But then also, I was at a comedy club years ago when I started out, and me and the other 2 comics on the show were clean. And a guy at the end was screaming at the waitress that he wanted his money back because nobody used the F word and it wasn't an adult show. And we rocked. I mean, we had a great show. So it's all, people do think clean is not funny, and that's sad. And they also think clean might be religious. No, if you're religious, you probably have to be clean, but if you're clean, that doesn't mean it's going to be any religious material. It's just humor that is not about body parts and not about cursing and such. So
right.
But
maybe it wouldn't work in a prison. I don't know.
I don't know. I've had some. Well, I'll have to say, I did a lot of bar gigs called one-nighters when I started out, and a lot of those were they wanted dirtier humor. But I bombed in a lot of those, but it wasn't all because of my humor. It was some of it was they didn't advertise it, so you'd show up and they literally turn off the Monday Night Football game and send the comics up. And people go to a bar to drink and to talk and to watch the game, and they don't want to see a comic they never heard of go up there. So I did have an event, a problem in a bar once where because I was too clean and people didn't like it. And I mean, there's nothing you can do. I needed the money at the time, so I just said, I'm going to go do this. But please tell people we're going to have comedy on Monday night.
So, I mean, this isn't necessarily relevant to the writing aspect of it, but, how do you, is this just something that I've always wondered, whenever I've thought, oh yeah, it might be fun to go do stand-up, but how do you handle when you bomb, right? To me, that would be like the ultimate sort of like terrible situation, but like it's part of life, and it doesn't matter how good you are, you're gonna bomb, right? How do you handle it?
Yeah. I guess we get thick skin. You either get good or you get out, and you get thick skin or you get out. So you have to stop focusing on worrying about bombing, and you have to put behind you if you didn't have a good show. But also, it is amazing. Humor is amazing in that some jokes that you think are just killer, nothing, and you'll try them out. I mean, some of us will keep on a joke for 2 years trying to and one person will laugh. And, yes, he gets me. But like a joke that a line that you throw out, just because I have a line, I talk about. I dated someone with teenagers. Lucky me. What do you mean you won custody? That line gets a killer laugh, and I didn't think that was the punchline. That was not I just threw that out. I said my original was, what do you mean you won custody? Nobody buy. If teenagers were the prize in the lottery, nobody buy a ticket. That's a nice tag now. But the line that just kills is the, what do you mean you won custody? And you don't know. I didn't know it. The first time I said that out, it took me 2 or 3 times to go, wow, that one's the killer. So as much as you think something's funny, even I've been doing this for years, you just don't know. But that would also bring me to, okay, so if you want to add humor into your book, you got to be very careful about listening to what other people say about it. Because if you think it's funny and you really want to put it in. I mean, humor is subjective, and everyone's going to have a opinion about it. I was talking to a friend of mine who coaches people on humor, and he said, oh yeah, before you put humor into a speech, you got to tell the client the jokes. I said, are you kidding me? Never. They have to trust that you know what you're doing. And you don't tell people the jokes ahead of time. I learned early on when I started comedy, I was at parties with friends and I throw out a couple jokes and they'd look at me and I'm like, okay, I'm never doing that again, because it's not a right setup, to tell people. People read a joke that you wrote for your book or something, but they don't know the context. They don't know everything. So they're just kind of reading it out, pulling it out. And it might not have the zing that it would if you put it where you want to put it. But yeah, I mean, I've only one time I did a big event for Lockheed Martin about 1.5 years ago, and huge event. And right before it was going on, she said, I don't want to ask you what jokes, but can you just tell me the topics? And I said, sure, here. And that was fine, because she wanted to make sure I always have a conference call and I find out about the group and what I can joke with. So she was fine with it. But I don't tell people the stuff. And so be very cautious who's giving you feedback on the humor, because they don't know any more than you do. Trust yourself,
I was at a, go ahead, Greg.
Well, I was just going to say, so then on one hand, it sounds like you think that you should have people reading the book before you publish it to make sure that it actually is funny, right? But on the other hand, don't necessarily listen to them. or
No,
are you saying don't even bother
no,
asking?
well, I don't know how people's publishing, if people want it, people read the book, fine, but be very careful if they say, oh, I don't like this joke, or, and maybe dig a little deeper. Why do you not like it? Do you think it's dirty? Do you think, but also just when it comes to humor, be careful of who you listen to, because it is very subjective. And if you think it's funny, then you want to put it in. You can always create, if you want to do dirty humor, create a character that's their character. Ventriloquists do that. I mean, they do clean stuff. Yeah. Oh no, it's Bob over here, because they want to do something edgier.
I was at a comedy club just recently, and there was quite a famous comedian, Sam Morrill or something, but he was literally testing his material. He was in this comedy club in New Brunswick, New Jersey, which isn't particularly huge there. And he had a sheet, and he was like, oh, I'm going to try this joke. And it was interesting, because that's what you have to do to know if your joke's going to hit. You have to go there. It seems such an amazing, like there's a Venn diagram with comedians of like incredible confidence to stand up into a stage, and yet incredible vulnerability at the same time, because you're going up like, and there's that little gap between the two, I guess, is the sweet spot.
You always try to put, and I haven't really stood on stage with a list of new jokes, but try to put new jokes in between ones that can work, so that if it doesn't hit, you just keep going. And that's what I do, is if something doesn't hit, just keep going. And you also have tester jokes, as a comedian anyway. When you get on stage, I know how my jokes on kids hit. They always hit big. If the group, isn't laughing crazy, for me, it's very calming. It's like, okay, that's how they're going to laugh. I mean, they're not, because I know these jokes are good. And I wouldn't toss out something that didn't hit right away, because you just don't know, different crowds, or the way you say it, or taking a word out, or taking a word in, adding a word, changes it. So.
Right. That's kind of what I was wondering about when I was saying, having people read it, because it's sort of like when you're testing out a joke, like you think it's funny, but maybe it's not. Maybe it really is just funny to you, or you just haven't set it up right, or you haven't got the wording.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you had a bunch of beta readers and everybody's sort of saying, yeah, that one just doesn't work, maybe that's when you look at it and say, okay, why doesn't it work? And
I had a club owner come up to me once. I had my opening joke, which I've used, is I got my I don't have any kids. I got my sister a baby gift. No, I was a joke about I like to get my sister gifts. I can't think of what it is. I do it all the time. Get my sister gifts. And anyway, the word I had in there was riding boots. My niece is going to love her new riding boots. And that is the joke, because I say I like to get my sister gifts, accessories to stuff they don't have. Every one of my gifts cost my sister $300. I can't wait until Christmas. My niece is going to love her new riding boots. I had riding boots in there for years, and it was about 95% hitting. And I had a club owner come up to me and say, Jan, I'm begging you to put in the word, got my sister a new baby. What's the word I use now? Riding boots. So I just use this word instead of riding boots. I got my sister baby, got one of those motor. Gosh, it's hard to jump it right in your act. But anyway, he begged me to change out the word. Begged me. He said, if you bomb all week because I made you change this word, it's okay. You get a pass. I'll still book you. And so that's the only time I changed the word, and it hits beautifully every time now.
So maybe, it's probably something that was more obvious than riding boots. People maybe not everyone knows what riding boots are. And
can't wait until Christmas. I got my sister. This is gonna drive me nuts because I say it every.
You're gonna remember at the end of this podcast just before we go.
Right. You'll send me an email. Can you?
Yeah, I will. It's in my book actually. It's I can't wait until Christmas. My niece is gonna love her new saddle. That's it.
Saddle.
So riding boots. He said, please use the word saddle.
Yeah, saddle. I think I see how saddle.
And it's faster. Yeah. Riding boots had a good cadence. Saddle. Boy, you can just edit
just
out.
So much more obvious.
Fumbling around, trying to jump into my act. It's the only time I really did say okay, and he really begged me, and the word worked. But for the most part, and people can give you ideas and stuff, and certainly I've gotten some ideas from people here and there, and I've given people ideas for stuff. But I don't follow up. Like you'll have some comics follow up. Did you use that line? Did you try? I had one guy tried. He wanted me to use a line. And I didn't even think it was funny. And it was a reference to a movie I didn't even watch. And I said, I don't think it's funny because I never saw that movie. And he just begged me. He said, it'll kill. I said, I know, but I want it to kill because I know, it's my act. And so I never did it. And he would just, every time I worked his room, he would beg me to, and I said, no, I didn't, I'm not going to see the movie now because because I'm not going to use that joke.
So when you're writing, when you're trying to write something that's funny and you're sort of going through a lot of these, especially because we see that process as you talk about it, you write a setup and then you write the punchline, but sometimes you can think of a whole bunch of different punchlines. And I guess what's the trick to picking that right one? And I guess that sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier about the danger of being too obvious. Sometimes like the really obvious one to you, even if it's not necessarily one you've heard before, but it's just maybe too obvious. Like everyone's just going to know before you even say it. What you're about to say, right? So there's that fine line of figuring out, is this the right line to follow that?
Right. And maybe if you have 3 or 4 lines, maybe don't tell your friends, hey, I'm thinking of it. Just toss them out and see if anyone anyone thinks it's funny. Try it. But something, it just comes down to what do you think is the funniest. But you're right. If people can see the joke coming a mile away, In fact, a funny story of a club owner I worked with, he was on a cruise ship and he ran a comedy club and he met people on the cruise ship and they begged him to come to the comedy show. And he kept saying, I see comedy all week. I don't want to do this. And finally he said, if I can nail the first 3 punchlines of the comedian, I don't have to see the comedy show. I can leave. And they said, oh, you'll never, this guy's great. Luckily, he said it was kind of a hacky comic and he went in and first 3 lines, he knew what the punchline was. And they were pretty obvious and everything. Finally, they let him leave. He said, oh, you do know the comedy. So.
Yeah. And that's the problem is like, you don't always know. And especially, I mean, if you're a really funny person, maybe you're always thinking of the best, the best lines and they seem obvious to you, but no one else will. But I wonder if you're not somebody who's naturally funny, you don't write comedy, you're just trying to add it. I wonder if that the most obvious lines are the ones that are going to come to you fastest and easiest, right? And you just have to be careful not to use those all the time.
Yeah, and dig a little deeper, just really. And sometimes when I'm writing, I put it away and come back to it and then look at it fresh and something will pop in your head, And the more you do it, the more you try to keep when you're not writing, just keep looking around to finding the ironies, finding the disconnects, finding, asking questions about things. And it just kind of works that humor muscle a little bit.
Right. So what is your, what's your process, I guess, when you're writing comedy? Do you just sort of sit in a room and just start making up jokes or is it like, do you carry a notebook around with you or your phone, I guess, these days, and just start, when you're looking around and you see something and you write it down? Because, coming up with comedy just out of the blue, sitting down being like, I'm going to write a funny scene right now would be a lot harder, right? If you, especially because, as you're saying, you look around and you've got to see the world and start asking questions about it, right? So, it's almost like you need that inspiration.
Yeah, I like to, well, when you start out in comedy, certainly you're, oh, that stop sign's funny, or, oh, that's funny, or, and you kind of write stuff. But after a while, you kind of write more with purpose. When I'm writing, especially like for a client or something, I like to get information. It's kind of research. Get a lot of information. So if you're writing on a book and you've got a topic, I don't know, go to Wikipedia or something and find just a couple sentences and pull something out of it and start asking questions about that and finding the humor in that topic. I like to see a paragraph that's not funny and kind of go through and pull something out. I want to ask questions about it. If there's a fact or a figure in there that you can have some fun with them, go to if you're talking about a town, you could go to the website on the town and they always have facts and figures about the town and have some fun with that. We had, there's 308 million people here, what would be funny about that? I mean, so go find, I don't just sit there and try to pull stuff out of the air. Try to do some research. I mean, what do you, if you're talking on a particular subject or city or whatever it is, or hobby, go to those spaces and find information on that. And then you've got something to look at and you can pull a sentence out and ask questions.
Yeah. And if you're writing a scene, I mean, you're not pulling completely out of nowhere. You have your scene to work on. Yeah.
Right. So you can add a funny feature about the scene or where it's taking place, or the temperature, or the time of day, or something like that.
Or adding in characters that have
That want to cuss.
quirks, or yeah, or yeah, exactly. Those characters just that sort of are only there for comedic relief.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, in terms of the books you've written and the writing there, could you tell us a little bit more about them? Are they fiction? Are they non-fiction? And how do you flow the humor into those?
Oh, non-fiction. First one is my book on writing, Finding the Funny Fast, How to Create Quick Humor to Connect. That's a lot of tips on what we're talking about today, how to add humor in, and a few stories. And then and that one really came out because I had a lot of people asking me, how do you do the joke so fast? How do you add humor so fast? Because I used to write for a lot of people. I wrote for radio for 10 years. They have a prep service where if like you're a DJ and you come in the morning at 4 a.m., you subscribe to what's called a prep service, and you get 50 pages of news stories and crazy criminals and showbiz sex, and then you have jokes and top 10 lists. And I wrote a lot of the jokes of that. We had hundreds of stations around the country, and I did them all in about 2 hours. I wrote about 15 jokes in about 2 hours. So people would ask, how did you come up? How do you write the humor fast? So I put it in a book, because that way I can just say, here, have a book that tells you. And the other book is called A Convention Comedian, Stories and Wisdom from 2 Decades of Chicken Dinners and Comedy Clubs. And it's just some stories of what's happened to me in comedy, and what I kind of learned, the lesson I learned, because I made a lot of mistakes. I also put in some of the stories on my Substack as well. So
that's, I think that little throwaway bit there, that radio shows how to get like a prep, how to get prep material, to me it blows my mind. Every day I'm driving my kids to school, and there's all, they're always the hosts are always talking about some weird news stories or some this or that, and I'm always like, wow, they really research this stuff all the time. And I'm like, now I find out, oh, they're just getting an email.
Not all of them, but many do. And it'd be funny because I'd be driving around the country when I was touring clubs, and I'd hear jokes that I wrote. Or a friend of mine called me one day out here in LA, and she goes, God, this top list was so funny that the DJ was saying this morning. And I said, oh yeah, you want to see it? It's on my computer. So yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, I had no idea. I guess they have to be careful though if they're all reading the same lists.
Well, and
the channel, and he's saying the exact same joke.
I'm sure there's different markets. I didn't have anything to do with what stations.
Seems like there's a lot of opportunities for writing when you're writing comedy as well. Other than just putting it in your own book, if you're somebody who wants to write comedy, what are some of the avenues that you can pursue?
Well, you know what I did? I kept if I was starting out now, I'd probably go to comedy club and watch comedians and offer to watch what they're doing on stage and offer to write something. I did something similar to that when I was when I keynote speak. I don't do it anymore, but when I used to watch the other keynote speakers, and I write down 2 or 3 jokes and say, hey, you can use these. And that would kind of get their attention a little bit, and they go, we want to write for me. So I picked up a few writing things like that. The radio stuff, I knew a friend who was doing that, and I just asked if he could introduce me, and he liked my writing, so he introduced me to the group. Cartoon strips, again, all my writing is pretty much networking. I've written for greeting cards, which are the hardest thing to write a joke for, because first of all, they don't want they want light humor. They don't want killer laugh, and it has to be, if it's a Mother's Day card, it has to be a mother of any age with kids of any age, very general yet specific. So it's very, very hard writing for greeting cards, cartoon strips, but all of it's been networking. So I would just go down to the comedy clubs to start out, or DJs. Still, I mean, some of them don't. Some of the smaller radio stations, they don't subscribe to prep services and offer to write for free just to get some experience, and then move from there.
I'm surprised. I didn't realize that. I know that on the TV, the late night talk show hosts, they've got to come up with home monologues every night. So I know that they have writers, but I would think that a comedian up on stage is more likely writing his own material. I didn't even think that they're hiring people to write jokes for them.
Well, you usually don't have to until you start churning up a lot of material. but you could offer if you wanted just to help a comedian out, do that. But yeah, if you're like getting really famous, then you need writers. If you're not, and I'm pretty adamant about, for me, I have people calling, oh, I want to win this funniest realtor contest or something. I'm like, no, then you have to do it. I'm not going to do it for you. I know that call me up and say, I'm ready to get on the Tonight Show. Write me 5 minutes for the Tonight Show. And I'm like, do you think I'm not trying to do that too? You know, I mean, I'm not saving those jokes to sell to somebody. If I could do that, I would. So I feel like you should write your own material. Yes, especially when you're starting out. But you know, I'm just looking from a writer perspective. I was trying to network, maybe go to some of the bigger names and don't submit right away because they won't use it, but see if you can make some contacts that way. Because yeah, they do need to, they churn through a lot of material. I don't know. I can say that saddle joke for now until whenever.
Isn't that the big stand-up comedians? They have like, for every season, they have like an hour-long set, and then they spend the off-season writing a new hour-long set. And it's like, you know, you can't have cell phones in the comedy club, so people don't record them, and then they put it into a special. So I guess you want to be quite protective of that, because otherwise people will steal your jokes. And you were talking about the late night TV. Wasn't there a scandal recently where one of the late night TV show hosts, he was telling a bunch of jokes and they were all taken from Ricky Gervais?
Oh, wow. I don't recall that, but yeah, it's, I mean, they say whoever gets it on TV wins. So you do have to be careful. You know, don't do your jokes in front of a bunch of people that you think it's hard to do them in LA because, you know, there are people out there looking for some easy jokes to pick, and mine are easy to pick off because they're, you know, set up punch.
So out of the book,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, out of the books you've read recently, like, what's some funny books you've read, or books that had humor in it and used it effectively?
Oh, I like more of history, kind of history or historical fiction. So I don't read a lot of humor books, you know. So I can't. I don't think I've read any that had a ton of humor in them.
Actually, I just read a biography of Winston Churchill written by Boris Johnson, who was the former Prime Minister of the UK. And it was a very funny book. It was very historically accurate. And he was talking about quite a controversial figure. And Boris Johnson is quite a controversial figure himself. But there were certain things that he recounted there that were very, very funny, because Winston Churchill was a very witty man and stuff like that. And it made it a much, you know, it's a big, solid book about one of the most written about historical figures of the 20th century. So you think, oh, everything has been done before, but then you read it and the humor really helps it become a new and exciting way of seeing something that you've read 100 times before.
I just read the book. It was about 500 pages from his daughter-in-law, Pamela. About her, and it didn't have a lot of humor in it, but the stories, real stories of things that happen, that's where you find the humor. And if you're writing, you know, about somebody or something, everyone's had some bad family vacations or some weird thing happen, you know, so that's the stuff where you can find the humor for sure, because sometimes reality is funnier than what we can make up.
True.
And I think one of the things that's amazing about humor is you can talk about things you probably couldn't talk about if they weren't funny. I mean, there's the old thing, the court jester was the only one who could speak truth to the king. And I think these days, in a lot of ways, like, we can make jokes about stuff that we can't talk about in a serious fashion. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about using humor, is if you want to write about real issues that are affecting the world right now, but you make them funny, then
look how we get our news. We watch the late night shows to kind of get the laughter with the fact that, oh gosh, this really happened, you know. I saw a great I use it in my keynote, a great sign at the airport for a colon cancer screening, and it says TSA doesn't screen for colon cancer, but we do, and it had the name of the hospital. That's great, you know. It's like, okay, that is funny. So, you know, using a little bit of humor like that, great.
I mean, that's funny what you just mentioned about the news. I mean, in the UK, all my British friends think they know everything about America because they watch the Daily Show, and that's like, and the Daily Show is hysterical, but I'm not necessarily sure how accurate it is. But yeah, they use humor so effectively to tell the news.
Sadly, it's accurate and it is funnier. Yeah.
Well, listen, this has really been interesting, because it is I really agree with you that adding humor really elevates the book. I mean, obviously you're not going to add it to every book, but having a few, even in a book that's not a comedy, not a, it doesn't mean you just because you've added some funny stuff into your romance, now it's a romantic comedy. But it helps. I mean, and even if it's just, you add those lines to one character, let's say, you don't want to turn it into a comedy book, but you have one character who's kind of jokey, and you give him all those throwaway lines. There's definitely ways to do it, and if you make people laugh and make people smile, they're going to remember your thing.
Makes your characters more human if they're funny. Funny things happen or whatever.
Yeah, and it makes it associates good feelings with your piece of work, right? So that's how it's going to keep it in their minds.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, well, it has been such a treat speaking to you, and it's been delightful. Now, before we wrap up, I would love it if you could tell our listeners and our viewers where they can find out more about you and more about your books.
Sure. My website, nobody can spell my last name, so we'll go with theworklady.com. Theworklady.com. As all my info is there.
That is fantastic.
And Substack too, I'm sorry. If you want to read some of my stories from my comedy days, go to my Substack.
Well, we will pop a link to that in the description of this video. So if you've enjoyed listening to Jan and you want to find out more about what she does, please scroll down there, check out, click on that link and check out everything she does. And while you're there, take the journey, because you'll go past that big empty comment box. Why don't you leave Jan a comment and let her know how much you've appreciated everything that she shared with us today, or tell us your favorite joke.
Yes, there you go.
And while you're down there, of course, there is that subscribe button if you haven't done already. There is that bell icon for to be alerted every time we have a brand new episode, and of course don't forget to hit that like button, and we'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Fully Booked. So thank you so much, Jan, for joining us, and we'll see everybody next week.